写 email 给德国的同事跟写 email 给美国的同事的模式相同吗？今天又要来从文化的角度来分析说服的方式。西方国家的思维不同，说服方式也大大的不同哦。Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管与沟通力的 Podcast。I'm Sherry, an educator, certified coach, and style enthusiast. 我相信专业有效的沟通是语言跟逻辑的完美结合。
And I'm Nick, a startup consultant, corporate trainer, and late-night gaming junkie. I believe great communication requires the right mindset and solid frameworks.
我们希望带给大家职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。
Join us each week as we share our experience, research, and methodologies to take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Executive Plus podcast. In the past, we've talked a lot about how to be clear and concise when emailing or contacting your clients or suppliers abroad. But one of the things that happens is a lot of what we're discussing has to do with how to contact American clients. But here in Taiwan, with major industries serving a lot of Europe, there are some major differences that you need to consider when it comes to talking to Westerners versus Asians. Today, we want to jump into that difference. And again, we're taking a bit of information and thought process from the culture map.
那今天的单元又是灵感来自《文化地图》这一本书。那最主要为什么想做这个单元，也是因为我们过往的所有的模式，沟通模式，可能是说服方式的模式，都是以比较 application first 的方法。那 application first 也就是书上面讲的应用优先 OK。 但是呢，如果你看西方文化，西方的国家，你会发现很多西方的国家它并不是用这样的模式，他们从小到大在学校啊，或者甚至他们的司法的这个整个系统都不是用这种方式来做沟通的。所以呢，我们今天也会来谈到，就是到底其他的国家，比如说德国啊、法国啊，或者甚至是意大利啊，他们是用什么方法来说服人家。
Now, what's interesting about getting into persuading is persuading is very much a cultural thing, because if you look at the history of different countries across the persuasion line, from the applications first, which would be the US, Canada, Australia, the UK, down towards the principles first, Italy, France, Spain, Russia, Germany, is actually, if you look historically at how those countries were built or what kind of thoughts come out of those countries, this starts to make a lot of sense. So, for example, Italy, France, Germany, these are a lot of your philosophers come from, right? Historically, most of your Western philosophy and Russia comes from these countries. So this is very much a principles first. It's a very theoretical or a thinking about things in terms of what's going on, what are our core principles. And then you flip over to the US, Canada, Australia. Historically, these are very industrious countries. These are countries that are younger.
Yeah.
So they actually spent most of their history building things. You really haven't gotten to what you would consider like that enlightenment phase, where you have a very well-built country and now people are starting to go back and reflect. These are countries that only have histories of a few hundred years. So they're very applications first. What do we do? What's next? How do we build it? And so you see a huge difference in the logic and thought process between these two sides.
Yeah, 我觉得这个真的非常的有趣，也是为什么想要来讨论一下这个 episode， 因为当我们能够了解为什么这个人是这样子的方式的去思考的时候，我们常常在沟通上面就比较会去调整。那刚刚 Nick 有讲到 principle first， 那我们中文可以讲说是原则优先，那就是这些比较历史悠久的国家，比如说意大利、法国、西班牙、Russia， 然后再来是德国，这些历史比较悠久的国家，他们喜欢去讨论 theories 或讨论哲学嘛。You talk about philosophers， 那我们这些application first 的国家是比较新一点的国家，就是澳洲啊、加拿大、美国啊，或者是英国。但是我们在职场上面，我们有的时候要 cold email 给客户，你可能不太确定他是从哪里来的 OK， 他就算在一个地方工作，但是他不一定是从那边出生的人嘛。 So I think today we just wanted to touch on how to more effectively communicate or persuade someone in the workplace by emailing or presentation.
Similar to what we talked about with the previous episode of high context, low context. If it's your first time to put contact to these countries or you're not sure where someone's from, a lot of times applications first will be an easier starting point because you want to make them feel that you respect their time, right? So getting to the point really quickly. But as you develop out relationships with them, you really should flex to the cultural norms and the way that they like to communicate and they would like to persuade. So in a previous episode, we actually talked a lot about frameworks.
Yes.
And there's a lot of application-first frameworks. The main one is if you go back and listen to our discussion on the Minto pyramid, core, these are very much application-first style frameworks. So following these becomes quite useful when making that contact with, say, Australia, Canada, and the US. But where you really have to start flipping is when you get into Italy, France, Russia, Spain, Germany, a lot of South American countries as well, Argentina, Brazil. You need to start thinking in a principle first type style. Actually, the easiest way to describe for me how principles first work is if you're familiar with coaching, where when in performance coaching, executive coaching, you don't tell someone what they need to improve on, what they need to work on. You actually have discussions to kind of uncover what are the areas that they want to improve on.
其实我们可以把它想成像三角形好了 application first 就是好像正三角形 right 顶端就是我们的 conclusion we always begin with a conclusion 然后我们才会有我们的 supporting argument supporting details right 那个这个也就是我们的 mental principle 但principle first 也就是原则优先我们可能就把这个三角形倒过来变成你可能要先解释你的 argument 是什么 you build up your argument 然后呢你可能要有个 counter argument counterpoints and then you come to your conclusion So that's kind of the way you can look at it 所以我们可以用这种三角形一个正三角形跟一个倒三角形的一个方式但是刚刚 Nick 有讲到当我们要 cold email可能今天我们要做什么开发性好了我们开发性的我们还是用 application first 我们还是用应用的方式因为我们并不知道对方是从哪里来那我们要节省大家的时间我们要比较简洁有力的方式那就是用 application first 但是如果你已经慢慢了解了这个人从哪里来他的文化是什么他可能是德国啊或者是他意大利人那你可以就稍微调整一下 But I think sometimes just by reading their questions because they will always come back with questions, right? You can always try to understand where they're from or maybe their logic. 那我现在来给大家一个例子好了a long time ago, a few years ago, I was talking to a German instructor in Taiwan. And because I'm so American at times, I'm so used to just stating a statement.我就是讲我的 conclusion. And, you know, when we're chatting, I really didn't think about anything. You know, I think when I'm chatting, I felt like I had to fill up the time, just have to keep the conversation going. So I remember I just told her, oh, I really want my kid to be able to learn German at some point.And that's just a statement. Really, 我没有在想说为什么呀或者是我只是这种感觉而已 So I just told her how I felt. And then she looked at me, paused for 3 seconds, and then she goes, why? And I was kind of taken aback because I'm like, what do you mean why? I haven't actually thought about it. I don't have good arguments to provide why. I think it's useful, but I don't know why. And so that was like the first time I really realized that, oh, wow, talking to Germans is completely different from talking to Americans or, people from this application first based persuasion, these kind of cultures.
For an American, they would probably be like, oh, yeah, it's so useful. Yeah. There's all these things you could do. You definitely can get more out of your travels if you learn German.
Right.
But with principles first country, then the question becomes, well, why would you do that? Not as, it's not in a defensive, like, no, why would you learn German? It's just more like, well, I'm really curious how you came to that conclusion. Like, exactly. I don't understand how you got there.
Yeah, because in my mind, it's like, you're German. If I say this, that would probably make you feel good, right? And that's not something I have to explain. But no, to her, it's like, why? 为什么 So yeah. I was like, okay. 所以真的可能当初我应该讲说，我觉得 pros, cons 是什么 actually have to list it out the arguments and then present it. Therefore, I think it's best for my child to learn German at some point in her life.
No, definitely. I've experienced the same thing, not with German, but with Italian and French, who are very much on the principal side.
Yeah.
But their emails are really long, like really long.
Yeah.
You never get a short email. At least in my experience, I never got a short email from a client or supplier in Italy and France. And it's definitely, as an American, that side of me going, what is the point? And I'm just scrolling down to figure out what in the world they want or what they're trying to get to. But culturally, again, they're trying to explain where they're coming from.
Yeah.
They're kind of explaining the details of why something got delayed, why something was out of spec, or why the part that was sent to them really wasn't quite what they wanted. But it's not until the very end that you would be like, oh, okay, this is how we want to make it actionable.
But speaking of like the length of the email, 我在那个书中的时候，他这个作者他还是也有给一个 example， 也就是他其中有一个客户是从欧洲国家来，那他要写信给英国的同事，他发现英国的同事都不想看他信 ，like they just don't read this guy's email at all because they said if it doesn't fit on the phone, then they're not going to read it. So just between, let's say, Italy and UK, they have this conflict as well. They have this cultural barrier.
So it's definitely one of those things where, again, as you build a longer relationship with these different countries, you need to start understanding that when it comes to persuasion, the way that you need to communicate with them is going to be very different.
Yeah.
Most of the time when we're talking about get your main point up front, or you get that advice of like, state what you want from the very beginning. That's very true when talking to a application first country. US, UK, Canada, Australia. This is the framework you want to follow.
Yeah.
But if you're dealing with a lot of European clients, flip that pyramid upside down. Start with these sort of what it sounds like details, but actually build up to your conclusion. Explain clearly. Now, one thing that's going to change, and we haven't talked about Asia at all, and there's a very specific reason for that. But this doesn't mean you can talk about anything.
Yes.
You actually have to layer by layer logically start to narrow. Again, upside down pyramid. You will start with broader principles, broader ideas or details. But you must go from detailed layer to key conclusions to what you want. It still has to follow a narrowing logic pattern.
Exactly. 那我们因为今天的时间的关系，我们并没有办法好好的讲到这种亚洲人的思考模式。那记得今天在讲这个 scale 上面，并没有任何的亚洲的国家 ，OK？ 亚洲的思考模式跟这种说服的模式又是不一样哦。So hopefully 我们在之后的 episode 可以带到这些。So yeah, I really hope you guys enjoy this episode today.
We'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.
The Executive Plus podcast is a Presentality Group production, produced and hosted by Sherry Fang and Nick Howard. You can search us on Facebook, 主管英文 Executive Plus. You can also find us on Instagram, Communication R&D, and email us at sherry@epstyleplus.com.